So pretty much all my life I've liked trains and model trains, predominantly steam engines and the early diesel engines, due to them being more interesting and weird and wacky, instead of the cookie cutter EMDs and GEVOs that all look the same to me. I know what I said. But I have been alluding to finally start making videos on this channel on my Warhammer channel for years now, and I think it's now time to start making some videos since I plan on building a layout. But what scale, you may be asking, if we just completely ignore that you probably read the title and saw what's in the thumbnail? Well, I have collected multiple scales throughout my time on Spaceship Earth, starting with of course the classic Lionel O gauge, then N scale, a little bit of O scale, then eventually going full circle and pretty much landing on HO scale, which is a combination of preference and a little bit of disability. But I have been on both ends of the model train spectrum on top of being on the autism spectrum. However, one was always the most interesting to me, and that's narrow gauge HO, or just narrow gauge in general. More specifically, the Denver and Rio Grande Western. One day I'll get that HOn3 K36, but I think I might have to sell one of my kidneys to afford that. But HOn3 is scale 3-foot gauge track, so you can run standard gauge HO scale and narrow gauge HO scale on the same layout. And this is actual 3-foot scale track and not N scale track like HOn30. So that's another plus to any future layout I might build. What really drew me into HOn3 though is 1, it's different compared to standard gauge HO, 2, the outside frame locomotives being unique steam locomotives, 3, it's a happy little in-between of N scale and HO scale, where you can get just the right amount of scenery and a footprint the same size as a standard gauge HO scale layout, 4, there isn't as much choice locomotive wise, so once you have all the ones you want, you're pretty much set. And 5, it's so niche, again, once you get everything you want, you don't really have to worry about a newer, better rerun of a locomotive you already had. Big boy rerun number I lost count has unfortunately entered the room. But HOn3 is what I like to call the rabid bloodhound scale, because you literally have to sniff out these locomotives in rolling stock wherever you can online, and at train shows, along with also chronically being online, fighting other people for said models, either bidding them up to stupid prices, since it can get silly expensive, or buying them the moment they go up for sale if the price is too good to pass up, or if it's a painted K36 or 37. And also it doesn't help that Blackstone Models is still missing in action 6 years later. But most if not all HOn3 locomotives besides K27s and C19s are made of brass from various importers like Precision Scale Company, Division Point, Pacific Fast Mail, and Westside Model Company to name a few. Most of my narrow gauge locomotives are imported by PSC, which at the time was considered the high-end brass, my first brass engine from Pacific Fast Mail, which is still unpainted and probably never will be painted, one Division Point that needed some TLC, which was why it was really cheap when I got it, 3 locomotives from Blackstone, 2 from Concor, and 1 from Erie Limited. I am in the process of converting everything to DCC with half of them done. Also, DCC is digital command control. What DCC does is allows for all the bells and whistles using what's called a decoder, which is really just a small logic chip. Plus, I might make a future video on DCC installation since I do that a lot, and my preference in decoder is lockdown for those of you that are wondering. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, so what locomotives do you have in your collection? Well, I have 1 White Pass Class 90, really want to get a hold of the green and yellow one, 2 Galloping Geese, 1 Davenport Switcher, 2 C19s, 1 Bumblebee and 1 Russian Iron, 1 K27, 2 K28s, 1 Bumblebee and 1 Moffat Tunnel, 3 K36s, and 2 K37s. But as you can see, with every locomotive I get, it makes a fine addition to my collection. Now, I'm sure some of you are probably asking what all this is for then, if you already have a layout, if the footage is anything to go by. Well, it isn't my personal layout. It belongs to my club, and for the sake of not overflowing our already tiny parking lot, I'm not going to name drop it. Just know part of it is modeled after the Denver and Rio Grande, both narrow and standard gauge. But I do have plans for my own layout in my garage. I'm just not sure about the finalized track plan, since as a lot of us know, a model railroad is never really finished. I am, however, getting closer to being happy with the current plan, is what I would say, but there are a few non-negotiables. The layout has to have a pseudo high line, because if I wanted to model it in an HO scale, I know I don't have enough space to do so. Based on pictures I see online of any K-Class locomotive on the High Line, I want to have various industries in and around the yard, one being passenger service because I own a lot of passenger cars with more on the way. Thank you, Golden Gate Depot, I can't wait to give you my money. I also want some stock pens, boxcar loading docks, and just switching or whatever I feel like having. So I will make a small town either loosely based on Durango, Chama, or just freelance, but you can still tell it's on the Denver and Rio Grande Western. I'm also going to try to not put in any tunnels. I'm taking a page out of Ken Patterson's book and making visual transitions for the various scenes. So trees, a bridge, various hills and rockwork. There isn't really going to be any changes in the elevation for the High Line, just a change in the bench work like on Layton's old layout seen in Heiss's videos on YouTube. And because most of what I own is brass, I need large curves. The minimum curve radius was going to be 24 inches, but now I have to revise the layout plan because I have a few more feet of space in the garage. So now it's going to be around 26-inch radius, and right now, the preliminary size of the layout is 9 by 14 feet. But I was inspired by a club member's home layout, and I plan on adding a loop that goes to an upper yard, and it branches off from either a normal number 6 switch or a Y switch. Probably a Y, but I would need to find one first. So I want to have some opportunities to run operations, and in layman's terms, that just means run it like a real railroad. So switching, timetables, certain pieces of rolling stock getting delivered to other places on the layout, and other things like that. And that of course means I need structures like coal towers, sand houses, water towers, town buildings, passenger stations, industry, stock pens, etc. So as you can probably tell, Warhammer and model trains are probably going to be fighting for my attention and time in the near future. But of course, the main Warhammer channel takes priority. Then finally, the layout has to be able to be easily taken down and set up, so parts of it will be modular or just in longer sections that can be moved and not sadly get destroyed if I need to ever move, which is the fate of many model railroads unfortunately. But making it modular will also help if I ever want to add on to it, if I ever feel like making the layout larger, or I just want to change in the scenery or even add a standard gauge HO layout in the future. So you can kind of see from the trial version of any rail I have here, and ignore the missing pieces of track, since I have the maximum 60 pieces of track out and I really need to buy the full version at some point, but you can hopefully see the vision I have. I hope to start working on the layout or start building structures and trees in the coming months, but I have to balance making videos for this channel and my main Warhammer channel. So uploads will most likely be sporadic and every once in a while. But thank you for watching. If you want to subscribe and come with me on my narrow gauge endeavors, I would really appreciate it. So I hope you'll stick around for my next video whenever the hell that comes out.